killed him.
I have an update from the internet, by the way. If you would like some TikTok dance names,
absolutely. The new dances there. So.
There's the whoa, there's the swag bounce,
The what?
Wow.
and the bust down, the smeeze. I think I'm saying that right. So my point is that, and this is coming from the generation after me, Paul. I know that you think the millennials are young, but I hate to break it to you. Millennials,
not anymore. No, I
millennials are entering our midlife crisis right now. We have 3 kids, and we're tired. The children, Gen Z, are on TikTok naming dances right now, this very second.
Jeez. Jason in Starkville said the moose knuckle shuffle. I don't think that's one, Jason.
That's not it. That's not
pretty good. Let's see. There's a dance called the stanky leg.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't even want to see that one.
I actually have done the stanky leg.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm not going to do it now, obviously, but I have done the stanky leg.
Any ace bandages needed after that, or
tore my ACL, 3 surgeries. Yeah.
I want to go back to this one more time on the equity and who is ultimately responsible for writing the check on this one. I understand the legislature, probably in the budget, but I'm talking about who directs this to that. Is it the university saying, okay, this is available to it? And I'm just asking, this is available. It's a pot of money. We might as well go get it. We can use it. We got some flexibility. We probably can use it to a point that's not as politically insensitive. But it's complicated, and I understand that. Do they have to take this money? Of course they don't have to take it, I'm sure.
No. Well, look, okay.
Why do they do this?
One pool of money comes from the state taxpayers. So the state's taxpayers help pay for our public universities, and so some of that money was used on DEI initiatives at the public universities. We found that between 2019 and today, about $23 million had been spent on DEI at our public universities. Out of that $23 million, $11 million came from you, the state's taxpayers. In addition to that, universities will also go out and they'll get grants that specifically pay for DEI initiatives, and often those grants come with strings attached, and they're required to put on certain programs to get them money. They don't have to take any of that money. There's nobody telling them that they have to do that, and then they don't have to spend state taxpayer funds on DEI initiatives. There's nobody telling them they have to do that. In fact, part of the purpose of us putting this report out was to tell individual taxpayers, look, here's how your money is being spent in Mississippi. If you're fine with it, okay, nothing more to see here. Go on about your day. If you don't like it, then you need to call your legislator and tell them, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to finance these kinds of teachings. I don't want my universities turned into indoctrination centers that corrupt the minds of kids and teach them to hate their country and teach them to think of themselves as victims. Other states have done this. Other states have put a stop to DEI initiatives. They put a stop to spending public dollars on DEI initiatives. Mississippi has not. So really, my goal and my job here is to tell taxpayers where their money is going. That's what the auditor does. I tell you where your money is going, and then you can decide on your own whether you like it or not, and whether or not you would like to call your legislator and demand a change.
Isn't it in a way, and I've talked about this for a long, long time, it's like it's an affirmative action on slavery. And I hate to say this because I think it's intended by people who want to do harm to this country or stay in political power, whether you are a political party. But it's because of slavery, anything goes. You guys did it to us, even though it was before we were born, as far as slavery is concerned. And that plays out. And when you have some adults, whether, very notable people in the African-American community or white community, it doesn't matter, kids listen to this. To the point where I had a cut the other day from a BLM Black Lives Matter spokesperson who said this.
If somebody decides to loot a Gucci or a Macy's or a Nike, because that makes sure that that person eats. That makes sure that that person has clothes. That's reparations. That is reparations. Anything they want to take it, because these businesses have insurance. They're going to get their money back. My people aren't getting anything. That's
a mindset from a well-paid or used to be well-paid person from BLM. They've declared insolvency, I understand.
It's disturbing. And if you look at BLM's expenditures a ton of the money went to pay for fancy houses and other stuff for a small set of people. And look, this is a pattern inside this sort of ideology. I'll give you an example back to our DEI spending here in Mississippi. One would think that if you really believe deep down in your soul that there were real issues that needed to be solved by a more diverse student body, and we needed to lift up students of color and students who were poor, one would think that you would want to spend DEI money on, I don't know, say scholarships for poor kids to go to college. Call me crazy. That'd be an easy way to do that. That'd be an easy way to achieve the goal of diversity. But instead, what we found in Mississippi, and this is true all around the country too, 70% of the dollars spent on DEI went to pay for salaries for adults. Very little of it went to pay for scholarships for poor kids to go to a Mississippi university.
That sounds a little bit like the Tea Party movement or BLM.
It's amazing. It's amazing how a small group of people can co-opt a cause, and somehow they just end up wealthier or more influential as a result. And it's usually the adults. It's usually not the 18-year-olds.
We have been cornered into a society where if we called you a racist, you are afraid, especially the bigger person you are with a more power base, head of a corporation, stockholder, whatever it happens to be, somebody that doesn't want to be financially injured or knocked out of the club as far as the liberals are concerned. But we see that every single day. And you are absolutely right. We have some very good points on it. You look at black crime and black-on-black crime, you say something about that. You're a racist. You look at abortion in the black community, you say something about that, and you're pushed back into the corner by being called a racist. And God knows if you're an African-American and you speak out, you're an Uncle Tom. You also see that it's nothing new. We've seen that for a while. Third-grade reading gate. There were a lot of people called racist because of that. When you start talking about fatherless child, which you wrote a good article on, you know it is the worst in African-American communities, and all of a sudden you are a racist.
It's really sad, and a lot of people get bullied out of talking about important topics because that word gets thrown at them. But look, I'll tell you this. In my first year as state auditor, we produced a report that showed that administrative spending in K-12 schools was going up and spending in the classroom was going down. Pretty dry, boring report in my opinion, but I thought it was important. And I got called a racist for writing that report. And that was the moment I realized that, look, I'm going to get called that word regardless of what I do. And in fact, the more frequently I tackle serious topics that matter for the future of Mississippi, the more frequently that word is thrown at me. So I just frankly don't care anymore. Look, I have 3 kids. I would love for those 3 kids to go to Mississippi universities, Mississippi public universities. I'm a graduate of Mississippi public schools, kindergarten all the way through my senior year at Ole Miss. But I am not sending my kids to a Mississippi public university if they're going to be indoctrination centers just like some of the big universities around the country. I'm not doing it. And so if I can do anything in my current position to prevent our universities from walking down that path, I will do it because this stuff is important. And I don't care what names get hurled at me. I don't care what people get mad at me. I don't care what friends I lose. I don't care what future jobs I may have sacrificed. This is important. It is important for the future of our state. It's important for the kids who are growing up here. It's important for the future of our workforce. It's important for the future of our society to have flourishing young people who believe that they can accomplish their goals and are not victim of some terrible oppressive system that they can't control. That's the point here. This is not for fun. This is not just for kicks and giggles. This is to make our state better and to help it achieve its potential. And I'm going to do that regardless of what happens to me.
Well put. Were you surprised at any of the figures when you start looking at the fatherless homes in our state and across the country?
No, I wasn't. And it's sad. We know that if you unfortunately grow up without an engaged dad in the home, you're 20 times more likely to prison. You're 9 times less likely to graduate from high school. You're 5 times more likely to end up in poverty. And again, I got called a racist for pointing out those statistics. I quoted those direct statistics from a Barack Obama speech on fatherlessness when he was running for president. So apparently it wasn't racist then, but it is racist now to say. I quoted those statistics, and when you look at Mississippi and you look at the number of kids, the percentage of kids who are growing up in single-parent households, and then you look downstream in their lives at how many people we have in prison, how many people we have in poverty, how many people drop out of school, We cannot be surprised that we're seeing problems downstream. Yeah. We have to get at these issues in order for our state to achieve its potential.
Do you have anything to do? You got to go somewhere?
No, I can hang.
Can you hang on for a second?
Yes, sir.
Here's some stats for you. If you're a racist, 60% of all rapists come from fatherless homes. I had the statistic on earlier this week.
It's tragic.
63% of all youth suicides are in homes with no father. 70% of kids who wind up in jail, 70%, come from homes with no daddy. 71% of high school dropouts, no daddy. 75% of all teenage murderers, 75% fatherless homes. 90% of runaways and homeless kids come from a home with no daddy. That's how important this is, whether you're called a racist or not. Back with more coming up next. Shad White, State Auditor, is in the house. Teresa Erickson, Director of Philanthropy, along with Alex Littlejohn, our friend from the TNC, the State Director at 805. And then nationally syndicated show star Lars Larson, family member for a long time, will join me coming up at 8:20 this morning. One of the things, Shad, that I've realized in life, and if you get this watching not dances from millennials, but the Animal Channel, is that any male mammal species that is absent in the family picture, in that picture, the offspring has dramatically decreased its chances of survival. And also, if you want to take it to another loop on there, when any male mammal species where the father does a terrible job of teaching its offspring, or to the very least inculcates in that offspring, they don't have a chance, that probably will come to fruition in most of the cases where they will not exceed and probably not even survive long term. And I mean, it's just a fact of life.
Yes. It's biological. It's the way God made us. And it's important. It's important. I see it every single day when I'm raising my 3 kids. You know, it's important to have 2 sets of hands there. Mommies and daddies bring different skill sets sometimes to the table. Yeah. And look, this is not to demean anybody who's a single mother out there, for example, who's working hard to raise her kids. I have single mothers in my own family. The statistics show that it is just tougher for a kid to succeed coming out of that environment than it is for a kid coming from a 2-parent household. And again, I would go back to the speech that I quoted from Barack Obama. Barack Obama was largely raised by his mother and his grandparents. His father was not particularly present. Mm-hmm. And he was the one pointing out these statistics, right? We know that these statistics are backed by a mountain of social science data. So we have to be honest with ourselves. That's the thing that bothers me, I guess, about the woke movement the most, is that they don't want to be honest about the way the world really is, because they fear that they're going to be perceived as racist, or they want to call other people racist so that they can virtue signal to their friends. We have to be honest about how the world is if we are going to solve the world's problems. And let me just say this about Mississippi. Mississippi is a great state. I think Mississippi has more potential than any other state in the entire country. I love living here. The average Mississippian is wealthier today than the average British citizen, which is nuts. I mean, to think about how far the state has come in the last 50, 60 years. But look, we have a deep-seated challenge that isn't going away, and it's our poverty rate. It's the fact that about 19% of Mississippians are in poverty, and the number is even higher for kids, 28%. What are we going to do about that? What's the nature of this poverty? This poverty is, for the most part, generational and systemic. Families pass it down from one generation to the next. And we have to break that cycle of poverty. And if we are not willing to say the words...
Hey, but how do you do it? How do you do it?
Yep. One, you have to acknowledge root causes. And part of the root cause is that you have a ton of kids growing up in single-parent homes. And that forms the basis of their chances for ending up in poverty later. And if we can't acknowledge that truth...
You can't legislate marriage.
I agree.
You can't legislate morality.
I agree.
You can't legislate the sanctity of marriage itself.
You can't tell a daddy to go take care of his kids, right? You can't legislate that. But let me throw some ideas out there, because we've seen things work here in the state of Mississippi that aren't being tried at scale. They're not being tried in a big way, but they are being tried and they're working. So, for example, when you have a kid who grows up in a challenging home, and you say, well, look, what that kid really needs is that kid needs more time with an adult who can be a mentor to them and teach them stuff. There are programs like the JROTC program, military program for kids. We have a great JROTC program operating Jackson Public Schools. When you put a kid through a program like that, it doesn't replace the daddy in the home. It doesn't replace a missing mommy in a home. But what it does is provide another adult who can kind of be a surrogate parent, who can watch that kid, who can keep them safe, who can keep them off the street, who can teach them stuff, who can tell them to stand up straight, look somebody in the eye, shake their hand, tell them how to interview for a job when that day comes, tell them how to apply for college. And what you see in programs like that is it radically changes the kids' lives. Those kids go from having, a 70-something% graduation rate to having a nearly 100% high school graduation rate when they go through the JROTC program. I went to a training in D.C. This was several months ago, and it's bipartisan training. They brought in Republicans and Democrats, and the idea behind the training was we're going to link people up who are emerging leaders in states with the top researchers in education and workforce development in the country, and we're going to tell you what the research says about how to change people's lives, how to bring people from being in a position where they're in poverty to where they're out of poverty. And the number one takeaway from all that research is if you start early and you start with kids and you increase their time on task and you increase the amount of time they spend with an adult who can be a mentor, who can teach them stuff, you are dramatically increasing their chances of not being in poverty, not being in prison later. That's what we have to think about here in Mississippi.
Stats prove that. Yeah,
Stats
absolutely.
prove it. We have to think about that.
And again, we're not talking only about, when you talk about fatherless homes, we're talking about across the board, not only African American, but it is a larger percentage. So you have to face that reality that it is a larger percentage. I've come to the conclusion that the only way that this is going to happen in the political atmosphere that we are in is a coalition of conservative and caring African Americans to start speaking up, coalescing in a powerful movement, moms and dads.
Yes.
And unless that happens, the iceberg is not going to break at all. Give me an idea. Police in South Haven, this is a story this morning, responded to 81 reports of car burglarized overnight. 81 in South Haven. This is not a mistake.
That's nuts.
According to reports, South Haven police were called to Baptist DeSoto Hospital. People going to the hospital to either visit or some of the worst times of their life. You're not in the hospital because you want to be, other than for a joyous thing, unless it's giving birth to a baby. South Haven police were called to Baptist DeSoto Hospital regarding car burglaries just after midnight last night. They found that 35 vehicles were burglarized in the parking lot. Police said the additional 46 vehicles located at nearby hotels were also burglarized the night before. We've heard about plenty of car break-ins around the stores and restaurants in Memphis, reports WREG. Now it seems the vehicles of patients, hospital staff, and emergency workers have also become the prime choice for thieves. Many of those are people wondering how in the world this took place. One source tells us it's about 15 to 20 kids, juvenile delinquents, who were behind the break-ins, and they were all over the parking lot on Monday night. Meanwhile, Baptist DeSoto said that they are offering to escort patients, visitors, and workers to their vehicles if requested. 86 vehicles, or 81 vehicles, in South Haven from around maybe 15 to 20 juvenile delinquents roaming the streets.
I'd be willing to bet that most of those juvenile delinquents were boys, too. That's what we see.
Fathers in the home.
That's what we see in the statistics, is that when you have young boys who grow up without dads, they are dramatically more likely to end up in juvenile penitentiary. And I'll just use an example. We talked about how do we solve this. Look, there are after-school programs that I'll give you an example of one in Georgia. One in Georgia has shown that they can reduce the percentage chance of a kid going to juvenile penitentiary by 30% if they're in the after-school program. The reason is that you take those kids and you put them with adults after the school day's over, and those adults keep them safe, they keep them off the streets, and they teach them stuff. And it's changing those kids' lives. That's the kind of thing we have to start thinking about if we want to form a coalition around a set of ideas to crack the poverty rate here in Mississippi. That is one of our biggest challenges going forward. And we have to not only form a coalition, like you said, Paul, of people who are of common sense, who want to tackle these problems, but we also have to be willing to stick with that coalition and stick with these solutions for at least the lifespan of the kids. You have to stick with it for 20 years before you're actually going to see any output. If we did that, if we were willing to acknowledge the problems head on, and we did that, we could really solve this problem. But I'll tell you what's going to happen. As soon as you start saying things like, well, we have to acknowledge the problem, you're going to be called the R word again. You're going to be called a racist. And we have to have leaders who are willing to ignore that language and just do the right thing. That's what it takes. That's what it's going to take in the future.
Unfortunately, those are few and far between, to be honest with you. Yeah. They are really few and far between when they start calling the race, throwing out the race card. And we already see that in some minute ways in this campaign, and we'll see more coming up later, I'm sure. But anytime you try to do something like a third-grade reading gate, you're going to get that.
Yep.
And the other part of that is it's more important now than ever before. We are under fire in this country. I mean, if you one of the things that when you dumb down society, and I've said this before, and again, State Auditor Shad White is with me, I said, if we are marching toward that thing that we seem to be, people want as socialism, don't they understand at the end of this, where right after the victory march, those who are demanding this one way or the other throughout history, not that it says it's guaranteed, but throughout history, they are the first to suffer?
Yep.
They are the absolutely one, and they wind up in something called mass graves, not something I've said. Read your history.
Yep. You're right. It's tragic, and we have to reverse the course that this country is on.
Arkansas is the first state in the U.S. to ban gender-affirming care for children by overriding a veto that former Governor Asa Hutchinson put on, but now it's been permanently blocked from going into effect. I want to talk to the state auditor about that from his legal profession, and we'll do that coming back in a moment. The governor, Asa Hutchinson, who, by the way, should be leading the polls if Republicans are ready to vote for a rhino, and he's not, and they're not. He vetoed that, but they overrode the veto, and now a judge there, a federal judge, Jay Moody, has temporarily blocked the law in 2021, but another judge has made it permanent. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read the ruling yet, but I saw that headline as well. Here's my guess about what the ruling leans on. My guess is that it probably leans on the Bostock ruling, which is a ruling from the United States Supreme Court recently. It's a ruling I vehemently disagree with. The basis of the Bostock ruling was saying that you can't discriminate against gay folks, and the reason you cannot, and here's the part I disagree with, the reason you cannot is that there's a statute that says you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex, and they stretch that, the Supreme Court stretched that to also protect folks who are LGBTQ. So I think what the judge probably did is lean on that ruling to make his current ruling.
Doesn't this bump into parental rights? We're talking about kids here. What age does that overrule? And a child at 5 years old has the same rights as an adult?
That's the problem. And not only that, but I do not believe that kids can say, a little girl can say when they're 7 or 8 years old, I believe I'm a boy, and they are entitled to legal protections, overriding the rights of the parents sometimes, to have medical treatment that gives them, for example, puberty-blocking hormones. Mm-hmm. So I want to circle back to a thing you said, Paul. You know, a lot of people are calling this gender-affirming care. It is not gender-affirming care. It is not. When you give puberty-blocking hormones that have an everlasting effect to kids, that is not affirming anything. That is destroying their little bodies. That's all that is. And so, you know, you'll read headlines, for example, from Mississippi Today. And by the way, if you're ever reading an article in a newspaper and it says it's written by somebody from Mississippi Today, you need to know that they're not your friends if you're a conservative. That's basically our version of MSNBC in Mississippi. They've written multiple articles about how terrible it is that we've in Mississippi shut down gender-affirming clinics for kids. And they say, you know, when you start talking about puberty-blocking hormones for kids, they call that care for trans kids. This is not gender-affirming. This is not care. This is destroying the little bodies of those children. I mean, I have a 4-year-old, and my 4-year-old last week thought that she was a fire truck. We didn't paint her red as a result. Kids are not capable of making decisions for the rest of their lives, that affect the future of their entire existence on this planet. So I don't really understand the factual basis of the judge's ruling, but legally I can tell you that's probably what he leaned on, and we really have to stand up and fight as conservatives for basic common sense principles in order to protect these kids, because we are running uphill against the elites of society who want to embrace this ideology at the expense of children.
They are smiling at the impact this very small minority of people of having. My wife had to fill out some forms on the doc. They make you fill these forms out every once in a while. So she was filling out some new forms. And in this one, the forms have completely changed. And this was yesterday. I'm not talking about 2-3 months ago. The forms have been completely changed. What race are you? Are you straight? What pronouns do you go by? It's the whole thing. The whole woke identification now is become part of the template in your medical records.
Yep.
So they've got to look at this and say, trans, we're only 0.6% of the population of this country, but damn, when you got the media behind you and you got the Democrat Party behind you, you can work wonders, and that's exactly what they've done.
Well, look, I agree that the LGBTQ movement is populated by a small percentage of people in the country. But look, here's the thing that's disconcerting to me, that's worrying. There's a study out of the UK that showed that the percentage of, or the number of people who identified as trans went up 4,000% in just a few years. That is not driven by genetics, Paul. That is not something that's being driven by genetics. That is something that is being driven by a social contagion of people who are getting on the internet, mainly young people. They're getting confused. They're being told when they're little boys that they may feel uncomfortable with their body, and they're actually little girls, or vice versa. The little girls who are, just because they're uncomfortable with their bodies or feel awkward during puberty, that they're actually boys. This is dangerous. This is very, very dangerous. We're shaping young minds with things that are not true, and we have to fight back against it.
Agree or disagree with me on this one, and I mentioned this more than once. We had gotten to a point, and again, I relate this to smoking, because we were seeing some unbelievable advances on stopping kids from smoking, and then vaping came out, and the tobacco companies won again, the ones that have their fingers in this. And we'd gotten to a point, even in families, even the most conservative of families, if you find out you were gay or you were a lesbian, you weren't ostracized to some foreign land. Mom and Dad accepted you more now than ever before, and that's fine. That's just who you are. We love you. And all of a sudden, this came out on the trans thing, and it's just been a backward flip. And then you want to go up to a kid and say, no, if you feel like a girl and you're 18 years old or 13 years old or whatever, you're gay, and be good with it. We love you. Be who you are. But boy, that has changed, and you saw it in those percentages. Man, thank you so very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me,
It has been
Paul.
Shad, and that's